Let me begin by saying that I am so grateful to my good friend and colleague, Reverend Megan Foley, for that wonderful meditation you just heard about calling. Megan and I got to know each other when we served together for several years on what at the time was called a regional subcommittee on candidacy of the Ministerial Fellowship Committee and at the Unitarian Universalist Association. That's a real mouthful. Megan currently serves as the regional lead, the lead consultant for the Unitarian Universalist Association's Central East region. And I believe she works pretty closely with Frank and Linda's daughter, Lenore. Now, when Megan and I served on that regional ministerial subcommittee, our primary job was to meet with and provide feedback to aspiring Unitarian Universalist ministers. The committee would spend 45 minutes to an hour asking each of the aspiring ministers a wide range of questions covering everything from their knowledge of Unitarian Universalist history and theology to their spiritual practices and approaches to self-care. Now, while I can't say that there was one question we posed that was the most important, I always paid especially close attention when a ministerial candidate was invited to tell us about their call to ministry. Some of the candidates had very clear and inspiring answers to the call question, while others who were early in the process struggled and were still discerning their call. I must say that while I was always impressed when a candidate was able to articulate their call at such an early stage of their ministerial formation, I always felt empathy and familiarity with those who struggled. And I think the reason I empathized with those who were still discerning their call was that at one time I had been that aspiring ministerial candidate, struggling to discern and articulate my call to ministry. Thinking back to those days, not long after I had received my acceptance letter into seminary, but before I had started school, and long before I went before any UUA or MFC committees, I had lunch with Reverend Robbie Walsh, the minister who had inspired me to not only become a Unitarian Universalist, but also to decide to become a UU minister. Robbie had been retired for a few years and we hadn't spoken in a while. A few minutes into our conversation, Robbie looked at me and simply asked, "So Tim, tell me about your call." Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't remember how I answered Robbie's question, but I remember feeling nervous and uncertain about what he was asking and how I was supposed to answer. I think I mumbled something about, well, I really like Unitarian Universalism and I care a lot about social justice. Is that what you're looking for? So now I have to say that ever since I had begun thinking about applying to seminary with the hope of becoming a UU minister, I had struggled to understand what this whole call business was all about. I mean, what exactly was it like to be called? What did it sound like? Who or what was doing the calling? I think that part of my problem stemmed from preconceptions about what a calling must be like, preconceptions that I got from watching too many Hollywood productions of epic Bible stories. I'm especially here thinking about, Cecil B. DeMille's movies like The Ten Commandments, in which Moses, played by Charlton Heston, hears this deep, booming male voice from a burning bush, ordering him to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. I guess I was waiting for some booming voice to say, Tim, become a UU minister. Needless to say, I never heard such a booming voice or any voice for that matter. I remember talking with another ministerial friend at the time who told me that she had experienced her call and had her aha moment one day when she was driving on the highway listening to the radio. Now, of course, in good Unitarian Universalist fashion, the station she was listening to was, of course, NPR. Now, I know this is going to sound sad and maybe a little pathetic, but after she shared her call story, I found myself listening a little more intently to NPR when I was in my car. Now, I continued to struggle with the whole idea of calling for quite a while, and especially the question of exactly who or what is doing the calling. Thankfully, while in seminary, I encountered the work of an amazing, wonderful spiritual writer named Parker Palmer, and his work completely changed my understanding of what it means to be called. If you're not familiar with Palmer's work, I cannot recommend his books enough. And here are three that I have found especially meaningful and important for me. And I read all of them while I was in seminary. Now, in simplest terms, Palmer argues that being called is at the heart of what it means to be human. Having a calling isn't reserved for ministers or prophets. It doesn't emulate from a burning bush. Rather, each and every one of us is called by what Palmer terms, and I love this term, our inner teacher, our inner teacher. And the roots of that voice, that inner teacher, are found in what Palmer sees as the basic human need for wholeness and unity, for living undivided lives, lives that reflect the essence of who we are, what we value, and what we hope for ourselves and for the world. As Palmer so beautifully puts it, people hunger to lead lives in which soul and role, spirit and vocation are in harmony, not in conflict with one another. But again, how does one listen for and discover that calling? Well, according to Palmer, our inner teacher speaks to us through our everyday lives, through our experiences, through our successes and our failures, our hopes and our dreams. A calling is not a goal that we set as if we can wake up one morning and decide, okay, this is it. I'm going to be called today. Rather, a calling is a deep-seated yearning, a passion, a realization that begins to reveal itself and somehow leads us where we are meant to go. Now, Palmer advises us, perhaps even warns us, that listening for and recognizing our calling, it's not always easy because our lives are so often filled with voices and judgments telling us who others or what society thinks we should be. Rather than living those undivided lives in which soul and role are in harmony, we find ourselves being told to work harder, to earn more, and to meet the expectations of everyone but ourselves. Meanwhile, our soul, our inner teacher, keeps calling, waiting for us, waiting for us, waiting for us to listen. Sadly, circumstances force far too many to ignore or even eventually silence their inner teacher, which can lead to lives that are unhappy and filled with what Henry David Thoreau called quiet desperation. But if we can just be intentional and listen deeply for our calling, our lives can and will become undivided and whole as our passion and our yearning become a way of life. When this happens, when soul and role come into harmony, Palmer says we will experience a rising tide of joy, a joy emerging from leading lives that are truly undivided, a joy that comes from, again, to paraphrase Thoreau, living deliberately. And when we listen for and then begin to live our calling, not only are we filled with a rising tide of joy, but amazing things also begin to happen in the world and in the lives of those we touch. Our yearning for unity and wholeness becomes, even if only in a small way, a creative force for unity and wholeness in the world. Our lives become a vocation, or if you will, a ministry, even if you never set foot in a religious community or hear a deep voice from beyond. That's why I'm especially drawn to the words of another great spiritual writer, Frederick Buechner, in his definition of vocation or ministry, which he calls, and I love these words, that place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. Our callings, our passions, our personal and shared ministries enable us to find and connect with those places where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. Don't get me wrong, listening for your calling and finding your vocation doesn't have to be about organized religion or church, or as Megan said so well, burnt lips and angels singing. Rather, our callings are all about what she called those thousands of arrows coming together in a way we never thought possible, coming together to point towards a path we never saw before, a path suddenly flooded with light, a path suddenly garlanded with your name. And our calling can grow and expand and be taken in directions we never anticipated. It's not like you're called and then your calling just remains static. It's growing, expanding, maybe changing. I can tell you, for example, in my case, with 100% confidence, that I am now called, deeply called, to be a devoted and loving grandfather to my precious granddaughter, Jane. It's not a decision or a choice I made. My grandpa calling is simply an irresistible joy that has blessed my life. My inner teacher is jumping up and down and has grabbed me by my heart while saying over and over again, "You are a grandpa to an angel." Make sure that little blessing comes first in your life and do everything you can to leave that beautiful child a world that is healthier, safer, more just, and more loving than the world you grew up in. Now, before I close, I imagine some of you are wondering if I ever figured out my call to UU ministry. I think it's fair to say yes, but that my inner teacher has never stopped teaching me, never stopped inviting me to live undivided with soul and role in harmony. But let me simply say that once I stopped listening for some Hollywood version of a calling and just slowed down and simply reflected and listened to my own life and my own deep yearning, the more I came to see and understand how much Unitarian Universalism, and especially UU religious community, had enriched and transformed my life. And the more I came to see that, the more I came to see that I had to do all that I could to share that gift with others. The sheer joy and hope and love that I have experienced as a Unitarian Universalist is the voice of my inner teacher calling me to serve, to lead, and to love. So the question I leave all of you with this morning is simply this: what is your life, your yearning, your inner teacher calling you to do? Where do you find your deep gladness? Maybe it's in the smile of a child or a grandchild. Maybe it's in the joy of love, the love you feel being a good friend or partner or spouse. And maybe it's found, and I hope, maybe it's found at least in part here in this community, the UU congregation of Charlottesville. It is always my hope that you will find some of your deep gladness in the shared ministry of this congregation. There are so many wonderful, meaningful ways we can serve together, grow together, experience deep gladness together, and bring our individual callings together into living the shared calling and mission of this congregation. A mission that is calling us to put love into action, to be a community of welcome, a community of spiritual growth and depth, a community working for justice and peace, a community that journeys alongside us through the joys and sorrows of life, a community that is, above all else, listening for and striving to follow where love, hope, faith, and life are calling us. May your lives be filled with joyful listening and always make room for that inner teacher. Amen, and blessed be.